The dirt road ended there, where the Cerrado swallowed any vestige of civilization in a horizon of dry grass and twisted trees. The January sun beat down on that stretch like divine punishment, and the silence was so absolute that you could hear your own blood pounding in your temples. It was there, on the shoulder of a road that didn't appear on any map, between the municipality of Chapada dos Barritas and nowhere, that the white pickup truck stopped for the last time. The girl was 17 years old. Her name was Luana, but it had been a long time since anyone had pronounced that name with any kind of affection. She was sitting in the back seat with an old backpack between her feet, and her eyes fixed on the dusty floor of the vehicle. She wasn't crying. She had learned early on that tears didn't change anything. They only bothered those who didn't want to be bothered. The father, Geraldo, turned off the engine and stood there for what seemed like an eternity. He didn't look back. His large, rough hands gripped the steering wheel as if he were making a decision that had already been made months, perhaps years ago. His wife, she wasn't Luana's mother, she never would be, looked out the passenger window, her thin lips pressed together in a hint of restrained satisfaction. "Get down," said Geraldo. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It had the harsh, definitive quality of things that don't allow for rebuttal, like a gate banging against its post, like a sentence read in a notary's office. Luana looked up. She searched the rearview mirror for the reflection of her father's face. Any sign of hesitation? A tremor at the corner of his mouth? Anything that would indicate this was a test, an empty threat. Just another of the cruelties he handed out, like someone throwing salt on the ground so that nothing grows. But the rearview mirror showed only two opaque eyes, without remorse, without doubt. "Okay, I told you to get down." His wife turned her face away, and there was such a slight smile there that it was almost invisible. Almost. But Luana saw it. She had learned to read the invisible signs of the people who despised her, the micro-gestures, the calculated pauses, the kindnesses that were poison wrapped in pretty paper. She knew that this woman, Neida, had worked for 3 years to reach this moment. 3 years of nightly whispers in Geraldo's ear, of complaints about the food Luana made, about the space she occupied, about the expense she represented, about her face that was the face of her dead mother and that, according to Nade, brought bad luck into the house. Luana opened the door. The heat hit her like a wall. She got out with her backpack and stood by the side of the road looking at the car. She waited. Some part of her, the part that was still a child, the part that still believed that parents don't abandon their children in the middle of nowhere, hoped he would change his mind, that he would get out of the car, that he would say anything that meant, "I was wrong," or at least, "I'm sorry." The engine started. The pickup truck reversed, kicked up dust, maneuvered, and sped off down the road back. Luana watched until the vehicle became a trembling white dot in the heat. Then a mirage, then nothing. And then I was alone. There was no sign, no fence, no shade. Just the endless scrubland, the sun, and a girl with a backpack containing 2 changes of clothes, a plastic comb, a half-empty water bottle, and a third of her mother's worn-out bills. Luana sat by the roadside. She didn't cry. She held her rosary and gazed at the horizon as one looks inside herself and finds only an immense emptiness, the size of that backlands landscape. Her mother, Conceição, had died when Luana was 9 years old. A fever that started out of nowhere and took everything in a week. On the farm where they lived, there was no doctor, no medicine, no time. Geraldo watched his wife die with the same expression he watched cattle die in the drought, with a practical, almost bovine resignation, as if death were just another loss to be tallied. After Conceição passed away, Luana took her place, not as a daughter who had lost her mother, but as a functional substitute. She cooked, washed, ironed, cleaned. I would wake up before sunrise and go to sleep after the last pot was put away. Geraldo never thanked me, never praised me, never said the food was good, that the house was clean, that it was growing beautifully. The only thing he did was point out flaws. The beans were too salty, the floor was poorly swept, the clothes were folded incorrectly. Each word was a small stab that left no visible mark, but gradually opened holes inside. When Nady appeared, a shrewd widow from Unai with eyes that calculated everything before smiling, Geraldo changed, not for the better. He changed as a man changes when he finds someone who justifies his worst inclinations. Nady didn't like Luana. She didn't like the girl's silent presence, the way she moved around the house without making a sound, her large, dark eyes that seemed to see too much, understand too much. Nady was afraid of what she couldn't control, and Luana was exactly that, a quiet creature who observed everything and didn't complain about anything, and this absence of complaint was more disturbing than any scream. Then the campaigns began. First came the small accusations. Luana broke the plate. That wasn't true. Luana responded disrespectfully. That never happened. Luana gave Nade a dirty look. It wasn't a dirty look, just a look. Then came the restrictions. Luana could no longer sit at the table with them. Luana could no longer use the inside bathroom. She had to use the outside one, the one near the corral that didn't have a hot shower. Luana could no longer watch television at night. Luana could no longer talk during meals. And Geraldo accepted everything. He accepted it because it was easier. Because Nade was there, in the warmth of his bed, and Luana was just a living memory of a dead woman he never knew how to truly love. Now Luana was sitting on the side of a deserted road, and the whole world fit into that solitude. She stayed there for hours. The sun was setting and the shadows were growing longer, and the sounds of the corrado began to change. The birds of the day were falling silent, and the insects of the night were beginning to awaken. Luana drank the rest of the water. She knew she needed to move, but she didn't know where. She didn't know that region. She had no money, no phone, no one to call even if she did. He rose as the sun touched the horizon. He chose a direction, not the one his father had taken, but the other, the one that led into the unknown, and began to walk. His feet kicked up fine dust that clung to his sweaty skin, and his backpack rattled against his back with each step. He walked until darkness fell completely, and the stars appeared so bright and so close that they seemed to fall upon him like a shower of silver. That's when he saw, in the distance, the orange dot of a bonfire. It stopped. His heart raced. It could be anything. A prospector, a muleteer, a good person, or someone not so good. In the Backlands, chance has the weight of destiny. A chance encounter in the dark can be salvation or ruin, and there's no way to know beforehand. But thirst was stronger than fear. Hunger was stronger than prudence. And something else, something Luana couldn't name, perhaps the same instinct that makes a wounded animal seek water, pushed her toward that light. As he drew closer, he began to make out shapes. A wire fence, a small corral, a horse tied to a post, its head low, resting. And next to the campfire, seated on a tree stump with an enamel plate in his lap, a man. He was a cowboy. You could tell by his clothes, the tanned leather pants, the worn-out jacket, the wide-brimmed hat that he never took off, even at night. His face was marked by sun and time, skin as dark as wet earth, hands that seemed made for holding rope in rains. He must have been about 35 years old, maybe less. The Backlands age those who live there quickly. The man heard the footsteps before seeing who was arriving. He raised his head slowly, without haste, without fear. He had the calm of those accustomed to dealing with unpredictable things. Wild bulls, snakes, storms, solitude. His eyes met Luana's at the edge of the campfire light, and he stood still, his fork suspended in the air, gazing at that thin, dusty figure emerging from the darkness like an apparition. They stayed like that for a while, a time neither of them could measure. He looking at her, she looking at him. The fire crackling between them like a conversation they didn't yet know how to have. "Miss," he said finally. His voice was deep and low, like distant thunder. "Are you lost?" Luana opened her mouth to answer, but what came out wasn't words. It was a hoarse, broken sound that dissolved into thin air before becoming a sentence. Her throat was too dry, her body too tired, and something inside her, which had been holding on tight all day, began to give way. The cowboy didn't move. He didn't suddenly stand up, didn't make a brusque gesture, didn't fire off questions. He simply put the plate down, took a canteen that was hanging from the horse's saddle, and extended it towards her with his long, firm arm, like someone offering water to a frightened animal, patiently, without expecting the animal to trust him immediately. Luana picked up the canteen. The water was lukewarm and tasted of leather, but it was the best thing she had ever drunk in her life. She drank slowly, feeling each sip go down and fill the empty space inside her. "Sit here," said the cowboy, pointing to a spot near the fire. "The scrubland gets cold at night." She sat down. She didn't say anything. Neither did he. For a long time they stayed there side by side, each in their own silence, listening to the fire consume the wood and the crickets chirp in the darkness. The horse snorted occasionally. An owl hooted in the distance. The cowboy's name was Elias. She only discovered this later, when the silence between them had already created a strange trust, the kind that is born not from what is said, but from what is left unsaid. Elias worked for a large farm 2 leagues away, tending a herd of 300 head of cattle that grazed freely in the scrubland during the rainy season. He lived alone in a wattle and daub shack with a cub named Feel, who that night was lying near the fire and didn't even lift his head when Luana arrived, as if he already knew she posed no threat. Elias didn't ask what a girl was doing alone in the middle of the scrubland at night. He didn't ask where she came from, where she was going, why her clothes were covered in dust and her eyes were swollen from crying without tears. He did what he knew how to do. He heated up the leftover beans in the oven. He put the fire on an enamel plate, broke off a piece of cornbread, and placed it in front of her without saying anything. Luana ate. She ate slowly at first, then with a hunger that wasn't just physical, it was for something deeper. It was the hunger of someone who hadn't received a gesture of care for far too long. When he finished, Elias pointed to a net set up under a jatoba tree. "You can sleep there. I'll stay here. And you? I sleep on the floor. I'm used to it. Luana looked at him. In the firelight, his face was all shadow and light, and she thought she had never seen a man with such a closed face, yet so devoid of malice. It was like looking at a stone wall and realizing that behind it there was a spring. She slept. She slept as she hadn't slept in months, without vigil, without startle, without the fear of being woken by shouts or the sound of heavy footsteps in the hallway. She slept lulled by the sound of the wind in the scrubland and the smell of smoke and wet grass, and when she woke up, the sun was already high and Elias was crouched near a new campfire, roasting coffee in a cloth filter. "Good morning," he said, without looking at her, as if it were normal, as if she had always been there. "Good morning. There's coffee, and there's bijou. Eat it before it gets cold." Luana sat by the fire and ate the bijou with clarified butter and drank strong coffee sweetened with rapadura. The dog, Feel, came close and touched his snout to her hand, and she petted his head and felt a strange thing in her chest, something that felt like belonging, but that she didn't dare call it because she was afraid to name something that could be taken away at any moment. It was during this breakfast that Elias asked for the first time, without pressure and without looking directly at her, "Do you have somewhere to go?" Her silence was answer enough. Elias nodded slowly, as if confirming something he already knew. "Well then, until you have it, you can stay. There's more work here than enough for one person." And so, without a contract, without a promise, without an explanation, Luana stayed. The first few days were strange. Not strange in a bad way, strange in a different way. Luana was so used to living in a permanent state of alert, measuring every gesture, every word, every expression, that the calmness of that place unsettled her. There were no shouts, there were no orders, there were no looks of disdain, there was only work, taking the cattle to pasture, repairing fences, fetching water, cooking, and the immense silence of the corrado that enveloped everything like a blanket. Elias was a man of few words, not out of rudeness, but by nature. He had grown up in a world where things were resolved with gestures, not speeches. When he wanted to say he was satisfied with the food, he would lightly pat his belly and nod. When he wanted to say the weather was going to change, he would point to the horizon where the clouds were gathering and simply say, "It's raining." When he saw that Luana was sad, and he did see it, though he never said he did, he would go into the woods and return with a wild fruit or a flower from the corrado and leave it on the table without comment, as if he had done nothing wrong. Luana learned to decipher that man as one learns to read a new language, through the intervals, the pauses, what was hidden between the few words he spoke. She discovered that Elias had lost his mother as a young boy and been raised by a cowboy grandfather who died when he was 18. Since then, he had lived alone, not by declared choice, but because I had never met anyone who made solitude seem worse than the wrong company. He had an awkward way of existing around people, like a large animal afraid of hurting small things. One night, Luana told him a story. He didn't tell it all at once, nor in an organized way, nor from beginning to end. He told it in pieces, like someone removing thorns from their skin, slowly, carefully, feeling each one come out. He told her about his mother, who died, about his father, who never knew what to do with a daughter, about Nade and her small, constant cruelties, about the day Geraldo put her things in a backpack, told her to get in the truck, and drove for hours without saying where they were going, until he stopped in the middle of an empty road and told her to get out. Elias listened to everything without interrupting. He didn't say, "That's absurd." He didn't say, "How could a father do that?" He didn't say any of the things people say when they hear a sad story and don't know what to do with their own indignation. When Luana finished, the silence stretched for a long time, and then he simply said, "You're here now." 3 words. But in those 3 words was everything. The acknowledgement that the past hurt, the affirmation that the present was different, and the implicit promise that she no longer needed to face it alone. Luana didn't answer, but something stirred within her, like a door creaking open after being closed for a long time. The weeks went by. Luana discovered she had a knack for working in the fields. She learned to milk cows, treat sick calves, and repair fences with wire and pliers. Her hands, which before had only known pots and brooms, gained new calluses and a firmness that came from handling living things. The sun darkened her skin, the wind tousled her hair, and she began to move through the world with a freedom she had never experienced, the freedom to exist without apologizing for it. There was a day when she saved a calf. The animal had been born in the early morning, weak, unable to stand, and the mother cow didn't want to nurse it. Elias had gone to get medicine from the neighbor, and Luana was left alone with that tiny, trembling animal lying in the grass, damp with dew, its eyes enormous and frightened, like those of someone who has just arrived in the world and is already being rejected by it. Something in that scene struck Luana right in the heart. She picked up the calf, it weighed almost nothing, took it to the fire, warmed some milk, improvised a bottle with a bottle and a piece of rubber glove, and fed the animal drop by drop, with the infinite patience of someone who knows what it is to need someone and not have them. When Elias returned and saw Luana sitting on the corral floor with the calf sleeping in her lap, he stopped in the doorway and stared for a while that he couldn't later explain. He said nothing, but at that moment, something inside him made up its mind. A decision that wasn't in his head, it was in his heart, and which he kept so deep that it would take months for it to find its way back to the surface. The calf survived. Luana named him Miracle, and he followed her across the pasture like a dog follows its owner, and every time she saw him run, strong, healthy, alive, she felt a silent joy that was, in fact, proof that she was capable of keeping something alive, of caring, of making a difference in the existence of another being. For someone who had spent her life being treated as a burden, this was no small thing. This was everything. Elias watched this transformation with a kind of discreet admiration. Sometimes, when Luana was focused on some task, mending a saddle or singing softly while stirring the pot, he would stare as one looks at something beautiful without realizing it. When she noticed and looked up, he would quickly look away, like a boy caught red-handed. There was a respectful distance between them that neither of them was trying to shorten. Elias slept in the ranch. Luana slept in a small room he had arranged with a wooden bed, a straw mattress, and a chintz curtain on the window. He never entered the small room without warning. She never crossed the silent boundaries he had established. They lived like two rivers running parallel, close but without touching. The owner of the farm, a man named Sebastião Borges, appeared one day in July riding a fat horse with a foreman by his side. He was a middle-aged man, his face red from drinking too much, his eyes small and calculating. When he saw Luana, he frowned. "Who is this, Elias? You're helping me with the cattle." "Helping?" Sebastião dismounted his horse and looked Luana up and down with the kind of look that makes a woman feel like merchandise on a shelf. "Helping how?" "At work, Mr. Sebastião. At work." Elias's voice had changed. It was the same deep, low voice as always, but now there was a note in it that hadn't been there before, a note of warning, like the low growl of a dog that hasn't bitten yet but is considering the possibility. Sebastião understood the message. He made a sound with his mouth that could have been laughter or disdain, mounted his horse, and rode away. But the following week, he sent the foreman with a message. Either the girl left, or Elias would lose his job. Elias didn't tell Luana about the message. She found out on her own because she overheard the conversation between him and the foreman, hidden behind the ranch wall. And what she heard made her heart clench in a way she wasn't prepared to feel. "Elias, the man is serious. You know what he's like?" "I know." "Then send the girl away. Find her a place in the city. You can't lose this job, young man. You have nothing else here. I know what I have and what I don't have. So, what are you going to do?" There was a long pause. Luana held her breath. "She'll stay," said Elias. The foreman exhaled forcefully as if giving up arguing with a rock. "You're risking everything for a stranger, man." "Maybe, but I know myself. And I know I won't be able to sleep knowing I put a girl on the road to please a man who has too much land and too little decency." Luana leaned her back against the wall and closed her eyes. Her hands trembled. No one had ever risked anything for her. No one had ever chosen her when there was something to lose. Her father had chosen Nade. Nade had chosen comfort. The whole world had chosen to look the other way. And now, there, in that godforsaken place, a cowboy she had known for only a few weeks was choosing to lose his job rather than fire her. She didn't know what to do with it. She didn't know where to keep that feeling that was too big for the space she had inside herself. So he did the only thing he knew. He went to the kitchen and prepared the best dinner he could with everything he had. Rice, beans, shredded dried meat, buttered farofa, cooked pumpkin. When Elias entered and saw the table, he stopped at the door and looked at her with an expression that was both surprise and something more, something that perhaps even he couldn't name. "What kind of party is this?" he asked. "None," Luana said. "I just wanted to do it." They ate in silence, but it was a different kind of silence, warmer, closer, as if the air between them had thinned without either of them moving. Sebastião carried out his threat. At the end of the month, he sent another cowboy to take over the herd and warned Elias to vacate the ranch within a week. Elias received the news with the same calm with which he received a storm, knowing it would pass, but without knowing what would come after. "Where are we going?" Luana asked, and the "we" came out so naturally that they both pretended not to notice the weight of it. "I have a friend in São Romão, on the banks of the São Francisco River. He has a small piece of land. He might need some help. Is it far?" 3 days on horseback. I've never ridden a horse for 3 days. Elias looked at her and, for the first time since they met, smiled. Not a big smile, not a smile of joy, a restrained smile, more evident in his eyes than on his lips, that said something like, "It'll be all right," without needing to say it. "Well, you'll learn," he said. They set off one August morning, with dry air and a sky so clear it hurt from the blue. Elias rode his horse, a gentle chestnut named Thunder, and Luana rode a mule borrowed from the nearest neighbor, a stubborn gray mule named Hope, which Luana thought was a joke the universe was playing on her. The 3 days of travel were the most beautiful and the hardest of Luana's life. They slept under the open sky, ate what they carried in their saddlebags, dried meat, flour, brown sugar, and talked more than they had time to. It had been a topic of conversation in all the previous weeks spent together. Something on the road loosens the knots that routine tightens. Without walls, without a roof, without the obligation to be who you were the day before, the words came more easily. On the first night, they stopped under an immense jatoba tree whose branches spread like the arms of a sleeping giant. Elias made a fire, heated dried meat on the embers, and prepared coffee in the cloth filter he carried hanging from his saddle like an amulet. Luana's whole body ached. Her thighs burned from spending the day riding, her back complained, her hands blistered from holding the mule's rope. But there was a strange satisfaction in that pain, the satisfaction of moving, of going somewhere instead of standing still, waiting for the place to come to her. The sky that night was something beyond words. Luana had seen stars before, of course, but never like this, without house lights, without city lights, without anything between her and the immensity. The sky was an open wound from which points of light streamed, so many and so bright that it hurt to look. She lay on the mat, her head resting on her backpack, looking up as one looks into a cathedral, and felt something she hadn't felt since she was a girl, the sensation of being small in the face of something great, and that this wasn't bad. It was, in fact, a relief. Being small meant that her problems were also small, that her pain was just a grain of dust in that immensity, and that the universe would keep turning regardless of what they had done to her. "Elias," she called softly. Did your grandfather know the names of the stars?" "Of all of them." He showed them to me one by one. "That one over there is the Three Marys," he said. "That one is the Southern Cross. That one over there, which twinkles more, is the morning star, which wakes up before everyone else." Beautiful. He used to say that the stars are the bonfires of those who have already passed away, that each person who dies lights one up there, so that those who remain down here don't walk in darkness. Luana looked at the sky and thought of her mother. She thought that perhaps Conceição had a bonfire there, somewhere among those millions of points of light, and that perhaps she was looking down at that very moment and seeing her daughter lying in the scrubland next to a silent cowboy, and perhaps she was at peace. The idea was too simple to be true and too beautiful to be discarded, and Luana kept it inside her as one keeps an old coin, without knowing if it's worth anything, but without the courage to throw it away. On the second day, the mule Esperanza stopped in the middle of a shallow stream and refused to move. Luana pulled, pushed, begged, pleaded, threatened. Nothing. The mule remained planted in the middle of the water with the empty and determined expression of animals that have made a decision and have no intention of changing it. To see her again. Elias, who had already crossed over, returned riding Thunder, looked at the scene, and for the second time smiled. This time it was a bigger smile, almost turning into laughter, and Luana was so surprised to see that closed face open up that she forgot to be angry with the mule. "Oh, she's testing you," Elias said. "That's how mules are. They want to see if you give up easily." "I don't give up easily," Luana said, and as she said it, she realized she wasn't just talking about the mule. Elias dismounted, entered the water, approached the mule, and whispered something in its ear, so softly that Luana didn't hear. The mule twitched its ears, snorted, and then, as if nothing had happened, began to walk. "What did you say to her?" Luana asked, her mouth agape. "It's a cowboy's secret," Elias said, mounting Thunder back onto the horse. "If I tell you, it loses its charm." And they continued. The corrado changed along the way. The dry grass gave way to trails, then to palm groves, then to stretches of riparian forest, where the birds made so much noise it seemed like a party. Luana absorbed that landscape with the hungry attention of someone who had just begun to. A lifetime spent staring at the same walls, and suddenly she discovers that the world is bigger than she imagined. Each new tree, each different bird, each bend in the road that revealed an unexpected view was like a door opening onto a room she didn't know existed within her own life. Elias spoke of his grandfather who raised him, a man named Teodoro who knew the names of all the stars and all the plants of the Cerrado, who cured maggot infestations with tobacco and prayer, and who said that a man's worth is not measured by what he has, but by what he is capable of giving without expecting anything in return. He spoke of the loneliness of the years that followed, of the nights when the silence of the ranch was so heavy that he would go out into the woods just to hear the animals, because even the sound of a cricket was company. He recounted, in a voice lower than usual, that sometimes he thought he would die alone and that no one would notice until the cattle began to moo with hunger. Luana listened attentively, recognizing in another the same pain she carries. And she recounted things she hadn't told before, about her mother, about the nights Conceição sang to her to help her fall asleep, about the scent of lavender lingered in her memory even after her mother was gone. She spoke of the day she understood that her father didn't like her, that he never had, that she was merely a biological accident he tolerated out of obligation, and that when the obligation became inconvenient, he got rid of her as one gets rid of something that's a nuisance. Sometimes I think, Luana said, looking at the horizon, that I was born in the wrong place, that I should have been born somewhere else, with other people, in a different life. Elias stood still for a while. The horse swayed beneath him in the slow rhythm of the walk, and the sun cast the shadows of the two of them on the road as one. Maybe so, he said finally. But if you had been born somewhere else, you wouldn't be here now. Luana looked at him. He didn't look at her, but the silence that followed had a different texture. It was soft, almost tender, like the inside of a seashell. They arrived in São Romão on the third day, as the sun was setting and the São Francisco River appeared before them like a silvery serpent cutting through the backlands. Luana had never seen so much water at once. She stood on the bank, her feet in the sand, watching the river flow, and she cried. She cried for the first time since her father abandoned her. They weren't tears of sadness, or at least not only of sadness. They were tears of something she couldn't define, something that lay between relief and astonishment, as if the river were proving to her that there were great and beautiful things in the world, and that she had the right to look at them. Elias stood behind her, at a distance that was both close and respectful, and said nothing. He simply waited. He knew that some tears need to be cried completely, without interruption, without consolation, without haste. Elias's friend was called Dimas. He was a thin, cheerful man who lived on a small property by the river with his wife, Dona Rosa, and 4 children ranging in age from 8 to 15. When he saw Elias arriving with a little girl, Dimas smiled broadly and shouted to his wife, "Rosa, prepare 2 more dishes. Elias has found company." Dona Rosa came out of the kitchen, drying her hands on her apron, and looked at Luana with a mother's eyes, that look that sweeps the whole person away. It takes 2 seconds and detects hunger, tiredness, sadness, and the need for a hot bath with the precision of an X-ray. Jesus, girl, you're thinner than a fishing rod. Come inside, I have food on the stove. Luana entered that house and was enveloped by something she hadn't experienced in years, the loving chaos of a functioning family. Children running around, a dog barking, a pot boiling, people talking over each other, laughter, affectionate scoldings, dishes being placed on the table with the joyful haste of those happy to have visitors. Dona Rosa sat Luana down at the table and placed in front of her a plate full of rice, tropero beans, sautéed kale, pork rinds, and fried bananas. Luana looked at the plate and felt her eyes burn again. "Come here, daughter," said Dona Rosa, with a naturalness that was so good it hurt. "There's no formality here, daughter." The word pierced Luana like an arrow made of something she didn't know still existed within her. She ate slowly, savoring each flavor as if she were eating for the first time in her life. Dimas offered Elias work on the property. He needed help with the crops, and the cattle and the land, though small, produced enough to feed 2 more mouths. Elias accepted with a handshake that was worth more than any contract, and so a new chapter began. Luana started helping Dona Rosa in the kitchen and in the garden, and she also learned new things. Dona Rosa knew how to make dulce de leche requeijão, a type of Brazilian cheese, ash soap, and she had a garden that was a miniature paradise, with tomatoes, peppers, chives, cilantro, rosemary, and flowers that served no purpose other than being pretty, which, according to Dona Rosa, was reason enough for them to exist. "Something that is beautiful doesn't need to be useful," said Dona Rosa while watering her sunflowers. "It just needs to be beautiful, just like people. Some people think that we need to serve some purpose to have value. Nonsense. We have value because we exist." These words sank into Luana like water on dry land. Not because they were profound or philosophical, precisely because they weren't. They were simple, direct, spoken, while watering a flower, and therefore possessed the irrefutable truth of things that need no argument. Dimas and Rosa's children adopted Luana as if she were an older sister who had gone away on a trip and finally returned. The youngest, a girl named Leah, clung to Luana like a tick to a dog and wouldn't let go, following her everywhere, constantly asking questions, asking to comb Luana's hair, sleeping clinging to her when she had nightmares. Luana discovered, to her astonishment, that she knew how to take care of a child, that she had a knack for it, patience, affection, that the things her mother did with her, the songs, the caresses, the bedtime stories, were stored somewhere inside her and now came out naturally, as if they had waited for this moment to emerge. And then there was Elijah. Elias, who worked from dawn till dusk without complaining, who arrived sweaty and tired and yet still found the energy to fix what needed fixing, to help Dona Rosa carry water, to play horsey with Dimas's youngest son. Elias, who looked at Luana when he thought she wasn't looking, and who looked away when she turned, always a second late, always caught. The distance between them began to decrease without either of them making a conscious decision about it. They were small things. Hands brushing against each other while passing a serving dish at dinner time. Steps that synchronized when they walked side by side through the street. Riverbank. Silences that were no longer empty, but filled with something that pulsed like embers under ashes. One afternoon, Elias returned from the pasture with a deep cut on his arm, a broken fence wire that whipped him. Luana saw the blood flowing and felt her stomach churn, not with disgust, but with something akin to panic. She ran inside, grabbed a clean cloth and alcohol, and went back to tend to the wound. Elias extended his arm and remained still while she cleaned the cut, and her hands trembled, and she realized they trembled not because of the blood, but because of the proximity. She had never been so close to him. She could feel the heat radiating from his sunburnt skin, the smell of sweat and grass and leather that was his scent, as particular as a fingerprint. When she finished bandaging, she looked up and found his eyes there, just inches away, fixed on her with an intensity that made her forget to breathe. "Thank you," he said softly. It was nothing. He was. The word hung there, heavy with meanings that neither of them was ready to unravel. Luana slowly released his arm, like someone dropping something warm, and went to the kitchen with her heart pounding so hard she was sure the whole world could hear it. There were also Sundays. Dona Rosa insisted that Sundays were sacred, not in a religious sense, although she was a woman of faith, but in a human sense. On Sundays, no one worked. On Sundays, people ate well, rested, told stories, and laughed. Demas would pick up the guitar. He played badly, but with rewarding enthusiasm, and sing folk songs that made Dona Rosa roll her eyes and the children playfully cover their ears. And on those Sundays, sitting on the porch with that family that wasn't hers by blood but was hers by choice, Luana experienced a feeling that took her weeks to identify. Normality. That was it. That was all. The feeling of being in a place where no one will yell at you, where no one will order you around. Although, where food is not a favor and presence is not a nuisance. For those who have never experienced it, normality tastes like a miracle. One night, Luana was sitting on the riverbank, her feet in the water, watching the moon reflected in the current. Elias appeared and sat beside her, not too close, not too far, at that exact distance he always kept, as if there were an invisible line he didn't dare cross. "Beautiful night," he said. Yes. The river flowed by. The frogs sang. The world was vast and dark and full of things they couldn't control. But there, on that stretch of riverbank, there was a peace that needed no explanation. "Is Elias." Why did you do all this?" "All of what?" "Everything. The water, the food, the internet, the job, giving it all up for myself. Coming here. Everything." Elias remained quiet for so long that Luana thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was so low it was almost lost in the sound of the river. "Because when I saw you that night, standing there in the dark, I saw myself. I saw the boy who was left alone when his grandfather died and no one came to get him. I saw what happens when the world turns its back on a person and they have nowhere to go. And I thought that if someone had done that for me back then, maybe I wouldn't have spent so many years thinking I didn't deserve it." Luana's breath caught in her chest. She looked at him, and this time he didn't look away. His eyes were shining, not with tears, but with something that felt like truth spoken in raw flesh. "You deserved it," she said. "You too." And that was the moment. There was no kiss, no hug, no declaration. Just two people sitting by a river, recognizing the same wound in each other, and in recognizing it, beginning to heal it. That's how the most important things happen. Not with an explosion, but with a silent click, like a key that finally finds its lock. After that night, something changed. Not drastically, not visibly to an outsider. But Dona Rosa noticed. She understood why she was a woman, and why women who truly love develop a sixth sense for the love of others. She noticed it in the glances Elias gave Luana when he thought no one was watching. She noticed it in the way Luana prepared Elias's dish with a different kind of care. The meat cut the way he liked it, the coffee at the right temperature, the beiju thicker because she knew he preferred it that way. "Girl," said Dona Rosa one day, while the two were peeling cassava in the kitchen, "that man is in love with you." Luana almost cut her finger. "What?" "No, Mrs. Rosa. He's in love, and you're in love with him. You don't need to hide it from me. I have 4 children and have been married for 30 years. I know what a person in love looks like." He never said anything. And he won't even say it. A man like Elijah doesn't say it. Elijah is one of those who shows who does, who stays. But to say it with his mouth, that he doesn't know how to do, you'll have to do it. You? Because if you wait for him, you two will die of old age sitting by that river pretending you feel nothing. Luana blushed to the roots of her hair, and Dona Rosa laughed, a pleasant laugh, The kind of laugh of someone who knows things and finds humor in the stubbornness of others and not seeing the obvious. But Luana said nothing, not because she didn't want to, but because she was afraid. Afraid that upon opening that door, she would find behind it the same emptiness she had found everywhere else. The emptiness of the father she didn't want, the stepmother she despised, the world she ignored. She was afraid that Elias was kind out of obligation, compassionate by nature, and that what she interpreted as love was merely the decency of a good man. What if that was all? What if she confessed her feelings and he became embarrassed, and what they had, this good silent thing, broke? The fear of losing what little one has is greater than the courage to pursue what one wants. Luana knew this firsthand. There was one night when it almost happened. They were returning from the river after washing clothes. Luana with the basin on her head, Elias carrying the sheets from the makeshift clothesline. And the sky was that impossible color that the backlands take on between day and night, a deep lilac that looks hand-painted. One misstep on a loose stone, and Luana, she stumbled. The basin fell, the clothes scattered across the floor, and Elias dropped everything he was carrying to catch her. His arms reflexively found her waist, and suddenly they were so close they could feel each other's breath, and the whole world stopped as if air were trapped in a throat. Luana looked up. Elias looked down, and there was something in his eyes that was so clear, so undeniable, so present, that she thought she would say everything right there, in that instant, throw her fear out the window and let the words flow as inevitable things do. But then the dog, Feel, appeared running and squeezed between them, wagging his tail, and the moment dissolved like a soap bubble, and Elias slowly let go of her and bent down to pick up the clothes. And Luana did the same, and they both pretended nothing had happened, but both their hands trembled, and the silence on the way home was so heavy it weighed like lead. But the world has its ways of forcing the hands of fate. One afternoon in October, Luana was in her garden when she heard the sound of an engine on the road. She looked up and saw a white pickup truck parked at the gate. A pickup truck she would recognize anywhere, at any distance, in any life. Her heart froze. Her hands stopped moving. The whole world shrank to fit into that instant. Geraldo got out of the pickup truck. He looked different. Thinner, older, with deep dark circles under his eyes and clothes wrinkled from traveling for many hours. She looked around with the disoriented expression of someone searching for something they don't know if they'll find. When she saw Luana, she stopped. He stood still at the gate as if he had hit an invisible wall. Luana didn't move. She couldn't. Her whole body had turned to stone. "Luana," said Geraldo. His voice was different too. Hoarse, broken, like something that had been used too much and was now failing. She didn't answer. "Daughter, Don't call me daughter." The sentence came out before she could even think about it, and it surprised them both. It held a firmness that Luana didn't know she possessed, a firmness that wasn't anger, but something deeper. It was the dignity of someone who had been thrown away and survived, of someone who had rebuilt herself with her own hands and wasn't willing to let the same person who destroyed her claim any right to that reconstruction. Geraldo lowered his eyes. "I know I don't deserve it." "He really doesn't deserve it." "I came to ask for your forgiveness." Forgiveness. The word hung in the air between them, heavy as stone, fragile as glass. Luana looked at her father and saw what he was. Not the monster she had constructed in her memory, not the merciless tormentor, but a weak man. A man who didn't know how to love, who didn't know how to protect, who didn't know how to be a father. A man who let someone else make his decisions because it was easier than facing them alone. This vision didn't lessen the pain, but it changed something. It changed the weight. "What happened?" Luana asked. "Nady left you and now you've remembered you have a daughter?" Geraldo swallowed hard. "She left. She took what she had to take and left. But that's not why I'm here. It's because..." His voice faltered. He took a deep breath as if gathering momentum to jump from a height he feared. "Because from the day I left you on that road, I couldn't sleep anymore, or eat, or look in the mirror. I'd close my eyes and see you standing there with that backpack looking at me, and I'd..." He brought his hand to his face and squeezed his eyes shut. "I'm the worst man in the world." "No, he isn't," Luana said, and her own answer surprised her. "He's just a weak man. The truth is, sometimes crueler than insults." Geraldo shrank back as if he'd been slapped. At that moment, Elias appeared. He came from the pasture, mounted on his horse, and upon seeing the pickup truck and the man at the gate, he dismounted slowly, with the air of someone assessing the situation before reacting. He walked over to Luana and stopped beside her, not in front, not behind, but beside her, with the naturalness of someone who is exactly where they should be. "Is everything all right?" he asked, looking at her, not at Geraldo. "Everything's fine," Luana said. "It's my father." Elias looked at Geraldo then, and the look he gave him wasn't one of hatred or threat. It was worse. It was the look of someone who knows exactly what the other person did and doesn't need to say a word to communicate it. Geraldo held the gaze for 2 seconds before looking away. You can go, Luana said. I'm fine. I'm better than I've ever been in my life. And it wasn't because of you. I know what you wanted. You wanted to ease your conscience. You wanted to be able to sleep at night. You wanted to hear me say I forgive you so you could go home and pretend everything's all right. But I'm not going to give you that. Now, not because I hate you, I don't hate you, but because forgiveness isn't something you ask for like you ask for a glass of water. It's something you build, and you haven't built anything yet. Geraldo stood there, small in his own shame. Then he nodded slowly, got back into the truck, and drove away. Luana watched the car disappear down the road, and this time it wasn't with despair. It was with a strange calm, like the calm that comes after a storm, when the air is clear and you can truly breathe deeply. Elias was still by her side. "Are you okay?" he asked again. "I am." She turned to him and, without thinking, without planning, without asking permission from fear, said, "Elias, did you hear what I told him? That I'm better than I've ever been in my life?" "I heard." "It's because of you. You know that, right?" Elias didn't answer, but his face changed. The hard line of his mouth softened. His eyes, which were always so guarded, opened a crack through which a light escaped that Luana had never seen before. "Luana?" he said, and it was the first time her name had sounded like that on someone's lips. Not as a call, not as an order, not as an accusation, like something precious that is held carefully so as not to break. I'm not good with words. I know, but if I knew how to express what I feel, I would say that since you appeared that night, I stopped being afraid of silence, because silence with you in it is different from any silence I've ever experienced. Luana felt the tears welling up, but this time she didn't try to hold them back. She let them fall, warm and slow, down her face and didn't wipe them away because she wasn't ashamed of them. They were tears of something new, something that resembled happiness but was deeper, because it had roots in pain, and everything that grows in pain has a strength that pure happiness doesn't know. Elias extended his hand. Not to pull her, not to embrace her. He simply extended it, palm up, as if offering without demanding. Luana placed her hand over his. His hand was rough, large, warm. Hers was smaller, thinner, but firm. They remained like that, hand in hand at the gate of a farm lost on the banks of the San Francisco River, while the sun set and tinged the world with orange and gold. And that was the beginning. Not the beginning of a romance like those in books, with kisses in the rain and grand declarations. The beginning of something rarer and more resilient. A love born of compassion that grew in respect, that took root in the constant and silent presence of two people who chose to stay by each other's side when the whole world gave them reasons to leave. The following months brought changes. Dimas, who was a generous and shrewd man, realized that Elias had a natural talent for working the land and proposed a partnership. Elias would take care of a part of the property that was in disuse, planting and harvesting, and they would share the profits. Elias agreed, and with the same determination with which he cared for the cattle, he began to cultivate the land. Luana worked alongside him. They planted cassava, corn, beans, and squash. The hands that already knew how to care for cattle learned to care for the land, and there was something profoundly right about it, as if everything they had lived through before, the pain, the loneliness, the rejection, had been merely the preparation of the soil for this sowing. Their relationship was built with the same patience as building an adobe house, brick by brick, layer by layer, waiting for each part to dry and set before laying the next. Their first kiss happened one December night, under a mango tree, with the scent of ripe mangoes in the air and the sound of the river in the background. They had gone to fetch water from the river and stopped to rest under the tree, and Luana was talking about a recipe that Dona Rosa had taught her. She spoke with her hands, gesturing, laughing at herself, when she realized that Elias wasn't listening. He was looking at her with that look he always tried to hide, a look that night had escaped his control like an animal breaking through a fence. Luana stopped talking. The air grew thick. The crickets chirped so loudly it seemed as if the whole world was begging for something to happen. Elias raised his hand and removed a mango leaf that had fallen into Luana's hair, a gesture so gentle for such rough hands that Luana felt her heart skip a beat. And then, without haste, without declaration, without permission asked or granted, their faces drew closer as if obeying their own gravity, and the kiss happened. It wasn't hurried or timid. It was inevitable, like the last step of a long walk. His lips tasted of coffee and molasses, and hers of guava. When they parted, Luana felt that something that had been out of alignment inside her finally fell into place, and she thought, without words, just as a feeling, that perhaps this was what people call coming home. Elias rested his forehead against hers and stayed there, breathing, and whispered something she barely heard but kept forever. "I've wanted to do this for a long time." Dona Rosa cried tears of joy when she found out. Dimas patted Elias on the back and said, "Finally, young man, I thought you were going to wait." "The girl will grow old," the children celebrated. Phil wagged her tail, and life went on, like the current of a river, forward, always forward, carrying with it everything it finds along the way. They married in a simple ceremony at the little church of Saint Romain, on a May morning when the river was full, and the sky was that impossible blue that only exists in the backlands. Luana wore a white dress that Dona Rosa had sewn by hand, with lace that had been from her own trousseau. Elias wore a new shirt, the first new shirt he had ever bought, and was so awkward he looked like a cow entering a crystal shop. But when he saw Luana walking towards him down the church aisle, the awkwardness vanished, and in its place remained only that look, the same look he had when he saw her engrossed in some task and forgot to hide it. Little Leah was a bridesmaid and took the role so seriously that she rehearsed her walk 15 times in the backyard. Demas was the best man. Dona Rosa cried from beginning to end, and later said she hadn't cried so much even at her own wedding. There was no honeymoon anywhere. The honeymoon was the life they had, in that land, in that house that Elias began to build with his own hands near the river, an adobe and clay tile house with a veranda facing the San Francisco River, where Luana hung a hammock and planted jasmine in a tin pot. A year later, their first son was born. A strong, dark-haired boy who cried so loudly when he was born that Dona Rosa said he would be a cowboy just like his father, because only cowboys have lungs like that. They named him Teodoro, in honor of Elias's grandfather. When Elias held his son for the first time, his enormous, calloused hands trembled, and he stared at the tiny creature with an expression Luana would never forget. A mixture of terror and devotion, as if he were holding the most fragile and most important thing in the universe. "I don't know how to be a father," he whispered so softly he could barely be heard. "Nobody knows," Luana said, touching his face. "We'll learn." And they learned. Through mistakes, through successes, through sleepless nights, through disproportionate fears, through a joy that overflowed in the simplest moments, the first smile, the first step, the first word which wasn't daddy or mommy, but water, which made everyone laugh, and Elias say that the boy was already more practical than him. The land yielded fruit, the farm grew. Elias and Demas expanded the plantation and began selling at the San Roman Fair. Luana, who had learned from Dona Rosa how to make sweets and cheeses, also began selling, and her sweets, dulce de leche, guava past, mango compote, became famous in the region. People came from far and wide to buy, and Luana attended to each one with that quiet kindness that was her trademark, and each sale was a small proof that she existed in the world, that she occupied a place, that she had something of value to offer. The first day of the fair was one of the hardest. Luana set up her stall early, before sunrise, with the jars of sweets lined up and the cheeses covered with a white cloth, and stood there, waiting, her heart heavy with an anxiety she hadn't expected to feel. It wasn't the anxiety of selling or not selling. It was the anxiety of exposing herself, of placing something she had made with her own hands before strangers and waiting for their judgment. Her whole life she had been told, directly and indirectly, that what she did wasn't good enough, that the food was too salty, the house wasn't clean enough, that she herself was an expense, a burden, one more mouth to feed in a world that already had too many mouths. And now there she was, offering the product of her hands to the world and waiting for the world to say whether it accepted it or not. The first customer was a white-haired lady who bought a jar of guava paste and, after tasting it, returned to buy 3 more. "My daughter," she said, holding Luana's hand with that familiarity that people from the countryside have with strangers, "this is the best guava paste I've eaten since my mother died. God bless you." Luana thanked her, and when the woman left, she stood behind the stall with tears in her eyes and a smile she couldn't contain, not because of the compliment itself, but because someone had recognized value in what she did. Someone had said, without knowing they were saying it, that Luana was capable of producing something good in the world. And this small validation, which for anyone else would be just a fleeting kindness, for Luana was like opening a window in a room that had been closed her whole life. Over time, Luana's stall became a landmark at the fair. People asked for her by name, they held orders for her, they brought empty jars to return and asked her to refill them. And Luana grew with this, not in a material sense, although the money helped, but in terms of who she was. Each customer was another thread in the embroidery of an identity she was sewing for the first time in her life. She was no longer the daughter her father didn't want. She was no longer the girl who was thrown away. She was Luana, the confectioner from Saint Romain, Elias's wife, the girl with the quiet smile who made the best guava paste in the San Francisco Valley. 2 years after Teodoro, a girl was born. They named her Conceição, after Luana's mother. When Luana held her daughter and said her name for the first time, she cried, not from sadness, but from something that lay somewhere between longing and gratitude, as if by giving her daughter her mother's name she was closing a cycle, connecting the past to the future by a thread that death had not been able to cut. And Geraldo returned. Not surprisingly this time. She sent a letter, a handwritten letter with shaky handwriting and grammatical errors, which arrived by mail from San Remo on a Wednesday afternoon. Luana read the letter sitting on the porch, with Teodoro playing on the floor and Conceição sleeping in her lap, and what she read made her very quiet for a long time. Geraldo was ill. His heart, the doctor said. I needed care that I couldn't provide for myself. Nate had left. He definitely took everything he could. Furniture, money, even the cattle. Geraldo was alone on the farm, his health failing and with no one. He didn't ask Luana to come get him. He didn't ask for forgiveness again. He only asked if she wanted, if it wasn't asking too much to let him meet his grandchildren. That's all. Then he could die in peace. Luana held that letter in her hand for 3 days. She didn't ask anyone for advice. She carried the paper in her apron pocket while she cooked, did laundry, and took care of the children. She thought, not about what her father had done. She had already processed that, digested it, transformed it into something that was no longer acute pain, but a scar that sometimes itched. She thought about what she wanted to be, the kind of person she wanted her children to see when they looked at her. On the third night, sitting on the porch with Elias, she asked, "What do you think?" Elias swayed in the hammock with Teodoro asleep on his chest. He looked at the river, at the starry sky, at the woman he loved. "I don't think what I think matters. What matters is how you feel. I feel anger. That's your right. And I feel sorry. Okay, that's fine too. And I feel that if I don't go, if I let him die alone without meeting his grandchildren, I'll carry this with me forever. Not for him, for myself." Elias nodded slowly. He said nothing more. He didn't need to. They went together. Elias, Luana, Teodoro, and little Conceição on a journey that retraced in reverse the path Luana had traveled years before. From the banks of the São Francisco River to the deep Cerrado, passing through the same dirt roads, the same dry grass, under the same relentless sun. When they arrived at Geraldo's farm, Luana hardly recognized the place. The house was neglected. The weeds had taken over the yard. The corral was empty. And Geraldo was sitting on the porch, in a rocking chair that no longer rocked because one of its legs was broken, with a blanket over his knees despite the heat. And when he saw the pickup truck arriving, Elias had bought one with the money from the last harvest. He stood up with difficulty and leaned against the door frame, his eyes filled with something that wasn't exactly hope, because he no longer allowed himself hope. But it was something close, perhaps astonishment that life was still, capable of offering him a chance he didn't deserve. Luana got out of the truck with Conceição in her arms. Teodoro ran down and stared at the old, thin man with the unfiltered curiosity of children. "Is that Grandpa?" Teodoro asked, tugging at the hem of Luana's shirt. Geraldo listened, and he crumbled. Not physically. He remained standing, leaning against the doorframe, but inside, something he had been holding on to with his last strength gave way, and he cried like Luana had never seen him cry before. An ugly, undignified cry, like an old man who had made many mistakes and knew he had, and that there was no way to undo what he had done, only to live with the weight of it. Luana walked over to him. She stood before her father, with her daughter in her arms, and looked at him for a long moment. Then she held Conceição out to him. "This is Conceição," he said, "like my mother, your granddaughter." Geraldo took the child in hands that trembled like a leaf in the wind. He looked at his granddaughter's face, which had Luana's dark eyes, which were Conceição's dark eyes, and pressed the girl against his chest with desperate care, like someone holding something they know they don't deserve but have received nonetheless. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you, thank you, thank you. Luana didn't say, "I forgive you." Not at that moment. Perhaps she would never say it in those exact words, but what she did, bringing the children, placing her granddaughter in his arms, allowing him to be a part of the life she had built despite him, was a forgiveness greater than any phrase could contain. It was the forgiveness of actions, which is more difficult and truer than the forgiveness of words. They took Geraldo to São Romão. Elias built another room in the house, and Geraldo went to live there, near his grandchildren, under the care of Luana and Dona Rosa, who treated everyone with the same maternal efficiency, without asking if the person deserved it or not. Because in Dona Rosa's simple philosophy, caring for people wasn't a matter of merit, it was a matter of humanity. Geraldo lived for another 4 years. They weren't perfect years. There were difficult days, days when their closeness reopened wounds that Luana thought had already healed. There were moments of tension, of heavy silence, of unspoken things that hung between them like rain clouds that never fell. There was an afternoon when Teodoro dropped a plate in the kitchen, shards of crockery scattered all over the floor, and Geraldo reflexively opened his mouth to reprimand him. And the tone that came out was the same tone he used with Luana when she was a child, that cutting tone that sliced self-esteem like a knife through thin leather. Luana, who was washing dishes with her back to him, stopped. She didn't turn around. She didn't need to. Her silence was so heavy that Geraldo felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. He looked at his own grandson, saw in the boy's eyes the same shadow of fear that he used to see it in Luana's eyes, and he felt a nausea that wasn't physical, but emotional. He slowly bent down, gathered the shards with trembling hands, and said to the boy in a voice that struggled to come out, "It's nothing, my son. Plates are made to break." These were the hardest words he had ever uttered, because each one was a correction of a wrong word he had said in the past. When Luana turned and saw her father on his knees picking up the shards, his eyes wet with tears, she understood that the change wasn't a performance, it was pain. The genuine pain of someone who sees themselves repeating a mistake, and for the first time decides to stop. Geraldo learned to be a grandfather the way he should have learned to be a father, by observing. He observed how Elias treated the children, with that firmness without harshness, that authority that didn't need shouting. He observed how Luana was with the children, and in each of her gestures he recognized Conceição, the wife he hadn't known how to value, because Luana had inherited from her mother the same strong gentleness, the same capacity to love without fanfare. And every time he saw this, remorse returned like a tide, and he swallowed it and remained quiet and tried, with his clumsy gestures of a man who never knew how to show affection, to build something there. A sandcastle on the riverbank, with Teodoro, a corncob doll for Conceição, a rocking chair that he repaired with nails and wire, and that was crooked but worked. But there were also, and this is what mattered in the end, the moments when Geraldo sat on the veranda floor and played with Teodoro and Conceição, and Luana saw in his face something she had never seen before, the expression of a man who finally understood what he had wasted and was trying, with the little time he had left, to live up to what he should have been. One night, shortly before the end, Geraldo called Luana. He was in bed, weak, his breath short, a sign that his heart was giving out. Luana sat beside him and waited, because by then she knew that the most important things need time to find their way from the chest to the mouth. "Your mother," Geraldo said, "would be proud of you." Luana pursed her lips. "I know. Me too. I know I don't have the right, but I am. You are everything I should have been and wasn't. You're here now. That counts for something." "A count?" "A count." Geraldo closed his eyes. A tear rolled down his temple and got lost on the pillow. "I was the worst father in the world, Luana." "He was a bad father," she corrected, with an honesty that wasn't cruel, just accurate. "But in recent years he's been a good grandfather, and I think that's what the boys will remember." Geraldo's hand sought Luana's in the darkness. She held it. They remained like that for a time. Neither of them wanted to measure, and in that handshake was everything that 4 years of living together had failed to express. The regret, the acceptance, the impossible gratitude, and something that closely resembled the love he never knew how to give and that she, despite everything, never stopped needing. When Geraldo died one September morning, quietly in bed, with Conceição's rosary, which Luana had placed in his hands, intertwined between his fingers, Luana felt a strange sadness. Not the violent sadness of loss, but the gentle sadness of someone who sees a story come to an end and knows that, despite everything, the last chapter was better than the rest. She cried, but she also felt relief, not that he had any. He had died, but he had had the chance to be, even briefly, the father he had never been. Elias found her sitting on the porch that night, looking out at the river. "Are you okay?" he asked, as he always would ask. "Yes," she said. And this time the word was entirely true. He sat down beside her. He took her hand. They remained like that, in silence, while the river flowed and the stars twinkled and the world continued spinning with its majestic indifference. And in that tiny piece of existence, on that porch of an adobe house on the banks of the San Francisco River, two people who had been forgotten by the world remembered each other, and that was enough. Because that's what love does in the end. It's not the kiss, it's not the hug, it's not the declaration, it's the presence. It's the act of being there, day after day, when the world gives every reason to leave. It's choosing to stay. It's extending the hand with palm facing up, waiting without demanding, for the other person to decide to place it there. It's looking at someone the world has thrown away and seeing in them everything the world failed to see. Luana looked at Elias. He looked at her. And in that look was everything. The dirt road, the night in the scrubland, the campfire, the canteen, the hammock, the fences repaired together, the river, holding hands at the gate, the kiss under the mango tree, the wedding in the little church, the children, the cultivated land, the pain transformed into roots, the forgiveness given not as words but as a life lived. Elias, do you remember that night? The first night? I remember. What did you think when you saw me? He was quiet for a moment. Then, in that deep, low voice that she loved above all the sounds in the world, he said, "I thought God had sent someone to me, and that if I let it pass, He wouldn't send someone again. Luana rested her head on his shoulder. He rested his chin on her hair. The river flowed by, the stars shone, and somewhere in that endless backlands where the scrubland swallows the roads and the silence has the weight of eternity, a girl who had been abandoned in the middle of nowhere had found everything. Not because someone saved her, but because someone saw her, and sometimes, amidst all the cruelty, indifference, and pain that the world is capable of producing, being seen is the miracle. And it was dawn when Luana finally closed her eyes, there on the balcony with the comforting weight of Elias's arm around her shoulders, and slept a dreamless sleep, without fears, without worries. A sleep of someone who knows that when she wakes up, someone will be there. A sleep of someone who knows she belongs somewhere. A sleep of someone who, after so long lost, has finally arrived. And the river continued flowing, as it always does, carrying with it the things that need to go and bringing those that need to arrive. In this eternal dance between loss and encounter that is, in essence, the only story that exists. The story of someone who searches and someone who waits, and of the sacred moment when the two meet and discover that waiting and searching were, in fact, the same thing.